I have had the most extraordinary mentors that come into my life at exactly the time that I need them. It's like a swing. Everything's plateaued. I'm not learning anything. I don't know where to go next. They come into my life, and the relationship, whatever it is, it might be about knowledge. It might be about having a vision for the future. They pick you up and they swing you forward into the next phase. And I've had 3 significant women who came into my life at exactly the time I needed them. It's so important in this field of medicine or nutrition where we're trying to push the boundaries and take the field further, that we always need to be open, either ourselves mentoring others and saying, hey, I was there once where I didn't know what I wanted to do, or looking for those extraordinary humans in our life that can kind of take us forward into the next step.
Dr. Yael Joffe, welcome to the Root Cause Medicine podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Kate. I've been waiting a long time to be on your podcast. I'm very excited to be here today.
I'm excited to have you. I have the privilege of being able to hear from you a bunch in the past year and watch you lecture and educate our students and watch them just learn so much that I'm thrilled to have you here. And I want to dive into this remarkable 3x4 genetics test that you have on the Root Health platform a bit. But before we do, I think you have a really cool story with how you got into this field. And I was wondering if you could share that story with us.
Yeah, it is a good story, because I think people always say to me like, oh, you're so lucky you're in like genetics. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay, luck isn't quite the story. Anyway, there's always luck. I mean, there is always luck, but the story is a little bit more. So the funny story is I was not a science nerd, and in fact, didn't even do science at school. I was into art and history and English, and I was the art kid, which is kind of funny. And when I finished school, I went to study architecture. I don't know if you know this, but anyway, now you know it. So I went to study architecture and art, and that was my dream. And while I was studying architecture, my grandmother got cancer, and I only had one grandparent, and I was really close to her. She taught me how to cook and to bake and to play rummy cue and crochet. I mean, I was really close to her, and she got cancer, and no one could tell us anything. They couldn't explain to me why she got cancer, what she could have done differently, how we could manage her cancer, how we could improve her symptoms. It was just a really horrible experience. And I was devastated. From when she was diagnosed to when she passed was like 3 months. And in that time, there were no answers. So me being me, I went and like doing all the research, and I found the Optimal Nutrition Bible. I'm talking about many years ago. That was like the only book you could read on like optimal nutrition, And I became like doing macrobiotics. I was trying to feed her vegetable soup. I mean, my poor gran, she was so sick, and she was like, I'll try it. All she wanted was actually Coca-Cola. But anyway, after she passed, well, actually a couple of days before she passed, I was sitting with her, and I just said to her, I think I'm going to have to leave architecture. Like, this is not okay. Like, we don't know why you got sick. No one can tell me. I can't find answers. I think I'm going to have to leave architecture. And then she passed, and that's what I did. So I left architecture, and I went looking for a degree in health. Now, many decades ago, it didn't exist. There wasn't such thing. We couldn't go become a naturopath. There weren't choices. You could become a doctor, a physical therapist, or a dietitian. And that was pretty much my choices, or homeopath. And I was like, well, the closest thing I can to studying health is dietetics. So I went, and I now had a problem because I'd never done science. So I went to try and apply, and they were like, well, you don't have any physics and chemistry. So I had to like claw my way into the department and study this awful physics and chemistry, which I don't know. But anyway, I got through that. And about 3 weeks into my dietetics degree, I was just appalled. I was appalled. I was sitting in this this lecture room, and the lecturer was saying, we're going to give our patient chocolate cake and ice cream. And I just was like, I don't know much. I'm only 3 weeks in, but I'm pretty sure that's not what you give a very sick patient. And I was like, I was that student who irritated everyone because I kept on asking questions. And I was like, why would you do that? And they're like, oh, it's got calories and it's got protein and it's got carbohydrate, it's got calcium. And I was like, no, this is horrible. And I was really like, I was like, what do I do now? I'm in the wrong degree. I'm learning the wrong stuff. Where do I go? And do I go to medicine? Anyway, I had one lecturer say, just stick it out, just get the degree. So that's what I did. I got my degree as a dietitian, did my time in the hospital. But all the time, I had this terrible sense of discontent and disillusionment, which is not unusual for me. And I was like, I'm no closer to knowing why my grand died from cancer, like no closer. So I finished my degree and decided I'd go traveling, because that's what you do when you don't have any answers, right? You get a backpack and you go traveling. So off I went, and being South African, clearly I'm not American, I'm South African originally. I landed up in London to go and work there so that I could earn some money to travel in Europe. And I met an extraordinary woman called Dr. Rosa Gill-Garrison. And she was a molecular biologist, so a geneticist. And she was so ahead of the game. She believed that genetics and nutrition would be the future of medicine. She was going to build the first ever Nutrigenomic test in the world. And she had angel investor to set up a little company called Saona. She lived on the Isle of Wight off the coast of England. And she was looking for a dietitian who specialized in genetics to join her little baby company, her startup. I was working for a nutrition clinic at the time. And she said, will you come spend 2 days with me? I was like, absolutely. I don't understand anything you're saying. I don't even know what a gene is. I can't even remember what a gene is. But I'm up for it. I had nothing to lose. And I went to spend 2 days with her. Still kind of didn't understand anything. But there was something about her conversation, about this idea of genetics and nutrition, that kind of just excited me without even understanding it. And after spending some time with her, I said to her, if you don't find a dietitian who specializes in genetics, please come back to me, because I'll learn on the job. Anyway, she came back like 2 days later. She goes, oh, by the way, there's no dietitians who specialize in genetics. I was like, yeah, I know that. And I said, I'm up for it. Like, I will work with you. I will learn from you. And I will, bought a textbook in the days when we had big textbooks, and started learning what is a chromosome, what is a gene. Anyway, I joined this little baby company, Saona, which eventually moved to Boulder, Colorado, and I moved with them. And while I was working with her and another geneticist, I was like, this is amazing stuff, but I don't want to be the dietitian who's giving the diet recommendations. I want to choose the genes. I want to talk about genes, And I realized as long as I was just the dietitian, I would never be that. So I went back to university and I got a PhD in genetics, which took me a very long time, because I was working full time. I had 2 children during the process. I got married during the process, changed countries a few times, but I got it. And so anyway, the moral story was actually about my gran, and that it took me about 10 to 12 years of being in this journey of this field of nutrigenomics and learning about it. And you couldn't study nutrigenomics. So you can get a PhD in genetics, but you couldn't study nutrigenomics. So there was nowhere for me to go. And I know we spoke earlier before we started about community. A large part of it was I had no community. I had no nutrigenomic mentor. I had geneticist mentors, but not nutrigenomic mentors. I had no courses I could study. It was really a lonely time where if I wasn't so stubborn, I probably would have stopped. But I'm exactly, the person who goes, if it can't be done, well, I'm going to figure this out. Yeah.
I love that.
I think you're all a bit like that.
Thank goodness you are.
Yeah. I mean, it worked in my favor, that stubbornness. And But I was like a leper in my community. I mean, I was totally excluded from the dietetics community. They said it was science fiction, it was fantasy, that I was never invited to speak. No one invited me onto their podcast. Not that podcasts existed in those days, but I was never invited. I was really completely kind of on the outside. But luckily for me, I was introduced to functional medicine in the year 2000. So when I was introduced to genetics, I was also introduced to functional medicine, where you would go to a IFM conference, it was like 50 people, right? And every conference was the same 50 people. And so I discovered a group of people who I was like, oh, these are my people. And and so that was like, thank gosh for them, because I don't know how I would have got through the next decade without functional medicine and all the amazing people I met that are still colleagues of mine now. We talk about the old days when, the conferences were really small. Obviously with Jeff, Dr. Jeff Bland, and so I kind of grew with Nutrigenomics grew. I kind of grew with it. And so people say, you were so lucky. Actually, I was just stubborn and I was looking for answers for my gran, which I do feel like I closed the gap on that. Like the circle was closed. I feel like all the things I was looking for, I found. It just took like 20 years to get the answers. Anyway, that's my story. And that's the beginning of my story. Obviously, we haven't told about what I built, but that's kind of how I landed up in this field.
I'm so curious, how did you run into a molecular biologist as you're backpacking through London? Like what? How did you meet her?
Well, I hadn't actually left yet. So I was trying to make money. If you live in South Africa, you got no money. So everyone goes to London to earn pounds, and then you can travel in pounds. And so I was doing like any job I could. And one of the jobs was a clinic in Harley Street in London who needed a dietitian to write position papers. Boring work. But anyway. And Dr. Rosalind Gilgarrison, was looking for a dietitian in genetics. And so she was contacting all the cutting edge clinics and saying, do you have a dietitian who works in genetics? Anyway, and they were like, well, we don't have a genetics one, but we have this dietitian person who's doing some consulting work for us, but I think she's leaving the continent any moment now. So it's like, I am, and this is where luck comes in, my journey and my career, and I'm sure it probably is very similar to you, is that I have had the most extraordinary mentors that come into my life at exactly the time that I need them. It's like a swing that I'm like, everything's plateaued. I'm not learning anything. I don't know where to go next. And they come into my life, and the relationship, whatever it is, it might be about knowledge. It might be about having a vision for the future. They pick you up and they kind of swing you forward into the next phase. And I've had like 3 significant women and they're all women for me. They don't have to be. Dr. Garrison was my first, but there were 2 more who came into my life at exactly the time I needed them. And I think it's so important in this field of medicine or nutrition, where we're trying to push the boundaries and take the field further, that we always need to be open. And because they don't always come in exactly the form that you think they will, either ourselves mentoring others and saying, hey, I was there once where I didn't know what I wanted to do, or looking for those extraordinary humans in our life that can kind of take us forward into the next step. I don't know if you've had that experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the reasons I chose Vestiaire, because I have a similar story. I think a lot of people in functional medicine do, where there was a gap of knowledge. And instead of accepting it, we just decided, well, that's not cool with me. So my options are I become a PhD, right? Or I become a clinician who's always on PubMed and is just like friends with PhDs and is always learning. And I have to say as well, I think the PhDs are the unsung heroes of particularly our field. They really, really are. We have the doctors who have a clinical degree, an MD, or DO, they're on stage, they're talking, but their entire book is filled with research that was the life's work of a PhD and PhD students and research assistants who have to apply for grants. And like, it's not glamorous work. And so anytime I come across, I won't say anytime, but frequently, if I come across a phenomenal paper, particularly like a huge systematic review, I will write to the authors and just say, like, I want you to know how, especially if it's free access.
Yeah.
Like, I want you to know how much I appreciate this, because I can't even imagine how much work this took you. And this, as a clinician now, taking this and actually, I can implement this in practice and really change people's lives. But really, I think the research, the people who are doing the research, the people who've studied, who've gone and gotten their PhD, like, are actually the ones who created the field of functional medicine. You look at Jeff Land, he's a PhD.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And thank you for saying that. No one's ever said that to me. It's brutal. It is brutal. I always tell, so the joke is, my kids always tell me I'm not a real doctor because I'm a PhD and I'm not an MD. I'm not a real doctor anywhere. So they make me feel really good about it. But it's brutal because you're always behind the scenes, right? You never get acknowledged for the work you do. And it's, I spent 7 years doing this, but in this much depth, right? So you don't get to be the MD who knows a bit of everything, and you go to dinner parties and everyone wants to chat to you. You go to dinner parties, no one wants to talk to you because you know so much about so little, and it's kind of academic. So you're not like, the dinner party guest that everyone wants, because no one can tell you, I've got these aches and pains, and, how can you help me? Anyway, so, I spent 2 years in a lab pipetting because they wouldn't let me use a kit for genetics. So I had to do everything by hand, like holidays, weekends, nights, like Christmas, New Year. And it's like, it was horrible. I cried more in my PhD than I think I've cried in my life, because it takes so much out of you, and you don't have that to show for it. And then you come out, I always say, like, and the one, people have said to me, should I do a PhD? And I'm always like, be very clear why you're doing it. Be very, very clear. Like, know your reasons, because if you're doing it for fame and fortune, it's really not the right way to go. If you really love the topic and you really want to dive in and know that's different. But if you think it's going to bring you fame and fortune, if you think it's going to bring you a community and you're going to be with people, it's not. It's very isolating. So it really isn't for everyone. And I don't think everyone needs a PhD. Like, I think you can be absolutely brilliant and not need a PhD. That's my personal opinion.
It's the work, though. It's the work product of the PhDs, where you're the one in the lab, discovering the finding, publishing it, which is also not cheap.
Brutal. Yeah.
And brutal. And then everybody else just gets to go like, well, yeah, isn't it obvious? There's a paper that says this. And you're like, it's like based on 5 years of work. And it is totally a labor of love. I feel that when people go into these fields, like, you have to have sort of this personal desire and burning connection. It's really a sacrifice.
You have to. And, it doesn't end. Like, people say, like, when did you arrive? Well, you never arrive. So, and every 5 years I had this, I would say I hit the wall every 4 or 5 years. I hit the wall. And when I go back and look at my career, I can actually track where I go, oh, I'm very clever. I know so much stuff. And then 4 years in, I go, I know nothing. And then I'm like, how did I get here? And I know so little. And then I'll go into another learning cycle, either a PhD or just studying or learning in a different way or something. And then I'll go, oh, I'm clever again. And then I'll go and this has been my career of 4 or 5 years. I can track it of thinking I've got somewhere and then realizing actually I really didn't. And so you never arrive. But that's part of the excitement is I have one of my extraordinary mentors is Dr. Christine Horton. She lives in Brisbane, Australia. She's a genius. She was a teacher, a chiropractor, a clinical nutritionist, And then she got a PhD in nutritional biochemistry, specializing in cell warfare. She completely intimidates me. She's so smart. Anyway, she's absolutely brilliant. And I have to tell the story. It's a beautiful story. So I used to go to conferences, Nutrigenomic conferences. There weren't many, and they were very academic rather than clinical. And I had a very small child at home. But I was like, I need to go to a conference. I need a break from being at home. And there was a Nutrigenomics conference in a very small town in Italy. So that was also, I think, part of the reason I wanted to go. I'll always go to a conference in Italy. Anyway, I go to this conference and I arrive there. First of all, like 5 of us spoke English. Everyone was like Italian or Spanish or French or Portuguese, but like 5 of us spoke English. That was the first thing that happened. And the second thing is all the talks were so academic, they were not useful. Like I just really, anyway, so I was like quite miserable. I was like, I'm leaving my baby. I came so far. It cost me so much. No one's talking to me. I'm like sitting by myself at lunch, the kid who sits, So the one good thing about this conference was that it was in Italy. So at lunch, they would have this big lunch with pasta, because this is the days when conferences still had gluten, right? They would have like pasta. And I'm standing in the queue with my little bowl to get my bowl of pasta. And I look at the table, and on the table, there's a bottle of white wine and red wine. So this is this is a long time ago, and it's Italy. Like every table has white wine and red wine, and they're serving pasta. So this is like a different kind of conference. Anyway, standing in the queue with my plate, no one's talking to me, and I hear someone speaking English, like 3 people behind me, with this very strong Australian accent. So I turned around, I was like, oh my God, you speak English? And I said, you flew even further than I flew. I came from South Africa, you came from Australia. And I see her eyes go like, oh, someone's speaking English. So I said, come stand with me. So she comes to stand with me. We get our bowl of pasta. We sit down at the table. And she says to me, oh my God, Yael Joffe, I've read your book. Like, I'm so excited to meet you. We were like the 2 people knew each other, like, I'm so excited to meet you. I also wrote a book. Here's a copy of my book. Anyway, 2 bottles of wine later, we drank the white and the red. Okay, these are the days when I still drank. Drank the white and the red. The conference is carrying on. We're still sitting at the table chatting. Anyway, this is Dr. Christine Horton. We never went back to the conference. She actually spoke Italian, which was wonderful. So we started finding beautiful restaurants to go eat and drink wine, and we just spoke about nutrigenomics. And she and I were on this journey, but we were on different continents and we didn't know each other, but we were on the same journey, which is, how do we bring value to clinical nutrigenomics? How do we teach it? How do we learn from it? Like, what do we do with it? Anyway, by the end of the conference, we were sitting in the hotel room, and I was like, I'm working on a course because I want to teach clinical nutrigenomics for clinicians because there's nowhere to study. And she goes, oh, that's amazing. I was like, will you teach one of the modules for me? Because she's a brilliant biochemist. She's got, absolutely. So we're sitting on the hotel floor, kind of sketching out this course module. Anyway, she walks me to the bus. We say goodbye. She goes back to Australia. I go back to South Africa. Not only did I get her to do one module, she pretty much wrote half the course with me. She was so amazing that we kind of built the whole course together. And that was in 2013, 2013, and we're still working today. We've published together, we've presented together, we've all our courses are co-authored, and that was one moment. We always say we're the yin and yang of nutrigenomics because she's brilliant in gene expression and I'm kind of gene sequence. And that one moment, standing in a queue waiting for your pasta, can change your life.
Isn't
that a great story?
It's a great story. Wait, now I have to hear about your third mentor.
Yeah, they're all good stories. So actually, my third mentor was Christine. My second mentor is someone I'm sure many of your listeners know, and her name is Dr. Ruth DeBusk. Now, Ruth really was the first genetics dietitian in the world. And I'm not understating that. She's got like a PhD in genetics and a PhD in nutrition. She's a dietitian, lives in Tallahassee. And there were two books in the world that were written on this topic of nutrition and genetics. One was Jeff Bland, no surprise. It was called Nutrition Genetic Engineering. Anyway, and the other one was written by Ruth DeBusk, and it was called The Genetic Connection or something. And I ordered this book. I was in South Africa. I ordered this book, and I got this little book. I was so excited to have a book written by a dietitian on genetics that I probably read it like 20 times. It wasn't brilliant, but it was the first. Someone's got to write that first book. And so she became my hero, my absolute hero. Anyway, when I moved to America to go and work in Boulder, in Colorado, with Saona, the genetic testing company, I had this dream to write my own book. Okay, I'd been thinking about it for years. Like, I liked her book, but I thought I could write a better book. Anyway, so I had this dream to write a better book. But I was nobody. I was a nobody. I didn't have a PhD. I was only a dietitian at that time, long before my PhD days. I was a nobody. You come from a foreign country, no one knows you. Like, you can't go to a publisher and say, hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so, and I speak at every conference, and here's a publishing deal. It doesn't work like that. So I phone Dr. Ruth DeBusk. And because not only am I stubborn, we have a word in Yiddish called chutzpah. I have a bit of cheek, you got to have a bit of cheek. So I phone her up and I say, hi, my name is Yael. I'm your biggest fan. I'm a dietitian from South Africa. I've read your book 10 times and I live in Boulder now. And I want to write a book with you. So, lucky for me, Ruth is one of the kindest, most generous human beings. And so she didn't put the phone down because there weren't that many people in 2000. This is in 2000, right?
Right.
This is a long time ago.
Right.
Who were like reading that book, not a lot of us. Anyway, so I'm like, I want to write a book. So I don't know, she must have thought I was mad. So she goes, well, actually, I've been contracted by the American, the Academy, the Nutrition Academy, Dietetics Academy, to write a book. So I'm afraid I can't write a book with you. I was like, oh. Okay, I don't take no as an answer very easily. And I'm like, but are you sure you would rather write that book than write a book with me? Anyway, so she said, she's so nice and she's so kind. I said, listen, spend one day with me and listen to my idea for a book. Spend one day with me. I'll get your flight paid for to come to Boulder and just give me one day in, and then we'll fly you back, and just listen to my idea for my book. Anyway, we spent we'd never met each other. I was like fangirl, and I was like, this is my idea. Like, here's chapter 1. Anyway, clearly it worked because by the end of the day, she canceled her contract for her textbook and she agreed to write. I'm very convincing when I agreed to write the book. And it's a very good story, this, I'll tell you why, because for a couple of things. First of all, I got my company to self-publish the book. All right?
Brilliant. Okay.
Because, I had no money. So I got my company to self-publish it. Ruth got paid and got all the royalties. I got nothing. Okay. Everyone said to me, how could you write a book and not get any money for it? I was like, it was the best investment of my life. The best investment. I got to spend 3 months with Ruth DeBusk writing a book. I went from being the most nobody person in the world of nutrition and genetics. And because I wrote a book with the number 1 person in nutrition genetics and our names were on the book together, you go from being nothing to being number 2.
Amazing.
Because she was number 1 and I wrote a book with her. And we are still, in fact, I'm meeting her tomorrow. We are still working together 25 years later. We still work together. She moved on from nutrigenomics to functional nutrition. She always says she handed over the baton to me. Everything that she would teach, I would kind of take over from her. We wrote the book together. We published it. We spoke together. We wrote articles together. And it's just, and we still are friends and we're colleagues. And she gave me that opportunity. This is my and I remember going to her to say, should I do a PhD? Because, and she's like, you don't need one. You already know more about nutrigenomics than most. She said, the only reason you should do a PhD is because it would open doors for you. It would open doors. And that's absolutely, for me, that was the power of the PhD, is that, you know what it's like to get on a stage, to be invited to speak at conferences. The PhD or the MD is always going to get on the stage first. Anyway, so those are my three, those are my three amazing mentors who are still part of my life.